Good afternoon and welcome to today's AFTD Helpline webinar, The Lived Experience with FTD, The Road to an FTD Diagnosis. My name is Schoonover and I am a Helpline Specialist for AFTD, the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration. Thank you for joining us today. We will get to the webinar presentation shortly. Next slide. And for those of you who may not have heard, it is currently World FTD Awareness Week. This week brings together awareness activities around the globe, focusing on the question of what if it's FTD? The campaign aims to educate families and healthcare professionals on the presenting symptoms of FTD and to contrast the disease to other forms of dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease. We are asking anyone whose life has been touched by FTD to participate in the FTD Awareness Week campaign. You can learn more by visiting our website. And at this time, we would like to share a poll to help us learn a bit more about our audience today and your connection to FTD. If you can select an option, then we will see our results. Give everyone a minute to answer. Okay. Okay, so we do have quite a mix in our audience today. We do have several people who are here with a possible diagnosis for themselves or for a loved one. And then we have others that have received a diagnosis for themselves or a loved one, and health professionals as well. So we really thank all of you for joining us today and hope you will learn a lot from our time together. We are pleased to present today's program focusing on personal journeys in obtaining an FTD diagnosis. As many of you know, the process of getting a diagnosis of FTD can be long and complicated. We know there are many of you who may feel very alone right now on that path, and today we want to offer you the opportunity to hear from others who have been there. Their experiences will provide valuable insight and encouragement for those currently seeking answers. And before we begin today, let's wait for our next slide. AFTD would like to thank Aviato Bio for their continued support of our mission and today's webinar. Aviato Bio is a gene therapy company developing novel applications to slow and potentially arrest neurodegenerative diseases. A current focus for the company is on a specific type of genetic FTD caused by an inherited variation of the GRN gene. And for those of you who may be new to AFTD, we also wanted to highlight our helpline as a resource for anyone looking for information and support related to FTD. We know many of you may have more specific questions about your situation, and you're always welcome to connect with us by phone, email, the web form on our website, or by scheduling a call with us through our website scheduling tool. We are here to help. And just a few more quick announcements before we begin. First, you should know that we have muted our audience to minimize background noise. AFTD staff are working behind the scenes, so if you encounter a technical issue, let us know directly by writing a message in the Q&A box. Second, time permitting, we will conduct a brief question and answer session at the end of the webinar with myself, also our Director of Support and Education, Esther Kane, and our Manager of Genetic Initiatives, Kim Jenny. Use the same Q&A box to submit a question. If you want to submit a question anonymously, just click the box to the left of the send button. We will try to answer as many as we can, and you don't have to wait till the end of the webinar. You can submit your questions at any time, and you're always welcome to reach out to us on the helpline with questions as well. This webinar will be recorded and archived for later viewing on AFTD's YouTube page and in the webinars section of our website. And now I'd like to introduce the folks we're going to hear from today who are sharing their stories through video recording. We recognize the immense courage it takes to share your family's personal journey, and we are deeply grateful to our presenters for their openness. And our first presenter is Debbie Elkins, who is an AFTD ambassador for West Virginia.
Hi, I'm Debbie, and I would love to thank the AFTD for giving me this opportunity to share the story of my husband's journey to a diagnosis for behavioral variant frontotemporal degeneration. I would like to say first that he's a great guy. He was a high school higher math teacher and a basketball coach, an offensive coordinator for the football team. He was very involved with his community. He coached basketball as an assistant for a couple of years for his college alma mater. And he is a fly fisherman. He loves to be outdoors, wading in a stream somewhere. I think that our journey to a diagnosis was probably not unlike many others. We noticed some changes within our family, and some of the family members were asking each other, have you noticed this about dad? Have you noticed this about my brother? And it took a little while before it felt like something other than, eh. So one day we went to his primary care physician, and I went along with him and sat down and asked her what she thought about this. And she did the little mini mental memory in the office that day. And she also asked him several questions, and she knew him quite well, and she didn't really see it. She didn't feel like she understood what it was I was trying to describe. Honestly, I didn't know what it was I was trying to describe because I didn't really say, well, he can't remember things, because that really wasn't it. And I could not for the life of me put my finger on it. It wasn't just that he didn't remember a few of the most recent things. There were some personality changes, some behavior changes, and I couldn't describe what it was in the loss of executive function that he was having, because I didn't know what that was myself. So it was quite difficult to put into words that he can't pack a suitcase. We have a wedding to go to, and I thought he was getting packed, and he's not able to pack his suitcase. So some of the first signs were not really things that I felt like were concrete or that I could put my finger on to really explain to a physician. So we were told, oh, he's okay. Within a couple of years, I mean, I knew all along he was not okay, but I asked for a referral to a neurologist. We went through some in-office testing. He went for neuropsych testing. He went for an MRI, and neurologist said, he's fine. I don't see anything. I don't even think he has mild cognitive decline. And I was so frustrated. I knew there was something, but no one could see what I saw. I couldn't explain what I saw, and he could whiz right through those tests. I mean, today, probably if you sat him down and did an in-office exam, he would probably blow it out of the water. Um, I knew that with these challenges, we needed to find more support and more resources. And the key to unlocking that, I think, for us was to find a comprehensive memory center. And it took another neurologist after the first one to say, your husband has Alzheimer's, after he had a PET scan. All he had had was the scan. This was another 2 years later. Um, Being sent to Ohio State University because we wanted him to have the monoclonal antibody therapy, undergoing a spinal tap, having a PET scan, all to be told, well, it's not Alzheimer's, but we don't know what it is. So backing up, I heard about a comprehensive memory clinic about 2.5 hours from where we live in a rural area of West Virginia, and took him there, where I was introduced to the term frontotemporal degeneration at the first meeting when the specializing in memory issues neurologist said, "This sounds a little bit like FTD." Had no idea what that was. We were asked to come back in a month to have a repeat MRI and sit down again. And in that month, I did a lot of research. I found the AFTD very quickly. I found the behavioral variant frontotemporal degeneration diagnostic checklist and felt like that answered all of my questions. I went through that checklist and I saw, oh, that's it, that's it, that's it, that's it. Took that checklist back to the follow-up appointment in a month. I'm going to convince this neurologist my husband has FTD. We had the MRI, went into the office, sat down. The neurologist came in and sat down, and the way he delivered the diagnosis was, your husband has FTD. And by that time, I knew what that meant because of that month that I had to explore that possibility, and because of finding the AFTD online and knowing that I had found a valued resource with information that was easily digestible. So it was definitely not a shock that day because I had had so much time in the month prior to really look at what FTD meant and to have an understanding. And I think probably the best way to describe how I felt that day was relief in having a diagnosis, um, despair in knowing that he had a neurodegenerative disease, and comfort in knowing that I had a community of people at the AFTD and others with spouses or brothers or sisters or parents that were diagnosed with FTD. So it was definitely something that while it rocked my world, it gave me something that I could understand about what was happening in our situation. My family comprised of our adult daughters, and I decided that while we were always pretty private people, we always held our cards really close to our chest. We did not want to not share this information with those that we knew in the community, knew and loved Chuck, and with other, friends and family. And within a month, we made a decision to make a post and put it out on social media and pin it to our social media accounts that explained what it was that he was diagnosed with, what that would mean that we were going through, because we felt like the more people that understood what was happening, the more people in our village that could help lift us up. So I think that whether he understood what his diagnosis was or not, we collectively made the decision that he no longer got to drive the bus, um, as far as his care and decisions. We knew that if he was fully able to digest what he was diagnosed with, he would definitely want to do things that would help other people. So we've always been very open about what his diagnosis is. We share it at every turn. I wanted very quickly to volunteer with the AFTD. I wanted to support other people who had somebody that was going through um, getting a diagnosis, trying to reconcile what that meant for them and for their families. I would say probably my top suggestion for achieving a diagnosis is, don't just accept that you think your loved one has dementia and that's all you need to know. Press forward with getting something more definitive. It can make a difference in treatment. There are treatments for some forms of dementia. Not a cure, maybe, but there are treatments that can help slow the disease. Different medications can make a huge difference in some dementias while making it more difficult for others. So I would say you got to get a diagnosis. You need to know what it is that you're dealing with. It's not just grandma has dementia, grandma's foggy. You need answers. And when you get up against a roadblock of, I don't know what this is, you can always turn and go a different route and find a different doctor. We saw 4 neurologists in 2 different states, and it took being at a comprehensive memory care clinic to get the diagnosis that I believe fits what we see with him. And because of that, now we have a whole other team of doctors there, um, neuroradiologists that do better at reading the exams that he has, looked at some of the scans from prior years and said, well, those give them pause. That's what they do. They look for those subtle things that maybe regular radiology that's also dealing with fractures and sprains and other things. Neuroradiology can really drill down and try to figure out what's going on. Do your research, keep asking questions, press forward with finding answers that fit what you see with your loved one. Educate yourself, find out what is executive dysfunction. Where do we go for somebody that's having cognitive changes that we don't have a diagnosis with? And don't be afraid to make a turn and to find a different doctor. Hi, I'm Deb.
Thank you so much, Debbie. We will now be sharing a story from Chris and Deborah Tan and their experience as a couple. Chris is a member of AFTD's Persons with FTD Advisory Council, and Deborah is founder and CEO of Reminiscent, a brain health community offering grassroots support to those affected by dementia, and teaches at Georgia State University in the gerontology department. So now we are sitting down here with Chris and Deb, who are going to share a bit about their experiences with navigating a diagnosis. So if we can start out, if the two of you can share, a bit about your life before, you started to notice, some of the changes with FTD.
All right. I think, Chris, I would like to start with the Genesis days, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. So back in 2001, some time ago, Chris and I had the opportunity to launch a private school in rural South Georgia. And he and I and our 3 now adult sons, we ran the school for 14 years. The year before we closed a school in 2016, but in 2015, I started noticing a lot of things that were going on, and I could not put my finger on it. I just knew things were different. I knew Chris was different, and I didn't understand at that point what was going on. In 2015 or so, we had been married 25 years at that season in our life. And so I was just doing a lot of, checking in my mind, what could this possibly be? I did not think it was a midlife crisis. I did not think that, but I didn't quite know what it was. But there were certainly some things that were different behaviorally. And I just, again, could not put my finger on it. As we fast forward, in 2016, the school was actually sold. So that gave me an opportunity and Chris an opportunity to be together more because I was home. I sold the business, I officially retired, so I was home. And that's when I began to see a lot of glaring things that I would not have seen had I continued to work at Genesis in the full-time capacity of which I was doing because I was the founder of the school. And so that took up some time of mine. And plus we had 3 sons at this time off to college. And it just was a lot of things, life, we call it lifing these days, were going on. But my being home shed a great deal of light on things. So you might be thinking and asking, well, Deborah, what did you see that was alarming? When this happened in 2016, I convinced Chris, it took me about 9 months to a year to convince him to go to the doctor. When we went to the doctor, I shared with our doctor that I shared 3 things. Now, I had a list of things, I had a litany of things, but I said, I need to keep this precise because I know I understand that that white coat turn, you're in and out kind of thing. So I said, one, he put the milk in the cabinet. I said, secondly, he was looking for crackers in the oven. And thirdly, he put the armor oil, that's for tires for your car if you don't know, and though that was in the bathroom. So those things were certainly out of the ordinary. I said those 3 things, and the doctor immediately said, you guys, I'm sending you to a neurologist. And that's when it all began.
Yeah. Chris, is there anything that you want to add, about those early days and first going to the doctor?
At once upon a time, I knew nothing about FTD. Totally nothing. If you had asked me about FTD, I said, well, I don't know. But now, since I've been diagnosed and understand the symptoms of it, it's a whole different story now. Now I want to advocate for it so others would not be as lost as I was when I was diagnosed with FTD. And then, the doctor told me that, well, there's nothing else I can do for you. We don't have a cure. Well, that didn't set too well with me, but I said, but God. So I'm still pressing on, and we're still doing great things, thanks to Deborah, my wife, and everything's going pretty good for me right now. I'm living a quality life right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, Deborah, do you want to go back to talk about that first neurology appointment? Yeah.
Yes, actually, yes. So, of course, the MCI was the first diagnosis in 2017. And then, of course, in 2019, it just was such a blessing in that we happened to have a doctor. When she walked in the room, for some reason, I knew I was going to connect with her. She had on Birkenstocks, she had ear piercing. I said, yeah, she and I are going to get along very well. And she just happened to be spot on in terms of her knowledge. And after visiting with us, being under her medical guidance, if you will, for about 18 months, between going to the appointments and then me keeping copious notes about the experiences that I was having, as well as what was going on in the home, and continued to watch, did extensive diagnostic testing, she was able to come up with the diagnoses of FTD. So care partners and caregivers play a critical role in helping doctors narrow down things to figure out and determine what exactly is going on. But she was spot on. And so after that, then I started digging quite deeply into what FTD was because I had never heard of it myself. Fortunately, I had already began researching some things and I had looked at a couple of things, but I had no idea it was this. And so when I read it, I was like, oh my goodness, she is spot on with her diagnoses. So I would say it took about 2 years to get an official diagnosis, which is very important. I would like to emphasize that to those who are listening, to have an official diagnosis of a disease, and FTD is definitely that. I was, again, quite clueless. So I had to catch up quite a bit. And I want to say, because I think it's very important that when with FTD and most of the other diseases, they start sometime out. And then of course with FTD, sometimes it just hits. And so again, I have to emphasize how important it is for the caregiver, the care partner, when they think about or look at things differently with their spouse or loved ones. It could be grandma, it could be your mom or your dad. When behavioral things and or language things start to change and they seem to be the antithesis of what you've known them to be all of your life, I surely encourage you to think neurological versus psychological.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, and it sounds like part of the key, you were meeting with a doctor that you felt was really listening and guiding you, even though it continued to be quite a process. But you've also shared how much you did in terms of recording what you're seeing to be able to share that, first with your primary doctor who was able to give you that referral, and then the neurologist, who it sounds like was really listening to you, even though we know the process of getting that name of the diagnosis can take a long amount of time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she was very instrumental. And I think his diagnosis was in, although the journey began officially, in my opinion, long before 2015, symptomatically. But in 2017, the MCI, then shortly after 2019, I actually was grateful. I was really relieved, honestly, to be able to know exactly what this is, because it was it was a rough ride. It was a roller coaster ride. It was not easy whatsoever. So finally, to have an official diagnosis and say, oh, this is what this is. For me, as a care partner and or caregiver, I was actually quite relieved.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's such a complex emotion, but I think that's something we hear from so many families, that it's not diagnosis anyone is looking for, but having the name to understand all of those different things that have been happening often for years, does give you, something to move forward with. And it sounds like you didn't know a whole lot about FTD when you first got the diagnosis. So, where did you go first? How did you start to learn about FTD and start to share with other people what the diagnosis was?
Mm. We were on our own, if you will, because the truth of the matter, not even many in the we just got, well, like I said, we had great favor with our neurologist. She just was on top of things. She understood. She knew what she was looking at. Her training somewhere along the line, she had training in this area. But that is not the case for a good percentage, a large percentage of individuals. So, fortunately, between her and myself, I think Chris was well insulated because she knew the medical side of it. I knew the care partner side of it. And between the two of us, we were going to make sure that he was well insulated and taken care of. And he was and has been and continues to be, which is why I'm convinced he thrives to this day, because he has such a wonderful network of people, particularly myself, who understand this thing called FTD, and what probably and not probably and his strongest advocate in the space. And so I wasn't the girl who waited upon someone to give me something or to share something with me. I seek out, I sought. It was incumbent upon me to understand this, um, just as well as perhaps his neurologist, because see, I had to live with it every day. So I had to best understand it and then have the ability to disseminate information to other family members. So it was no pause for me in
Mhm.
protecting Chris. I wasn't waiting for my neurologist or anybody to tell me this, that, or the other. I dug for myself because in my life, he is and was at that time just that important to me to empower myself with all the tools in the toolbox that I could obtain.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think that shows, the other key to this was your strong advocacy, and the two of you and your strong relationship moving forward.
Yeah.
Um, can you share it all about, what were some people's reactions when you were first starting to tell others about the diagnosis? Probably others who may not have heard about it before either.
Huh. Well, the usual. You don't look like you have frontotemporal dementia. That basically came out. Or I guess with our family, like our sons, they just said, wow. And well, anything that we can do, we'll do, whatever it takes. So that was good support, without a doubt. I shared it with I think one other person, which was my boss. And I just asked her, I said, hey, if you see me doing anything out of the ordinary, please let me know. And to this day, she haven't said anything actually. So everything's been going great. Actually, I'm going to retire next month. So everything's been going great. As far as support wise, I didn't. My circle is not that big, really. It's really family and maybe a couple friends here, but it's not really that big at all. The main thing is Deborah, her understanding of it and all the things that she's done and doing to keep me well grounded in this journey that I'm on, which is very important to me. So actually, if she tells me that I'm doing something wrong, she said, "Oh, I'm always finding an excuse." But anyway, I understand what she's saying, and I have to focus on that, not to do that again. So that's positive for me. For me, that helps me out tremendously. And I just want to say one thing about all the different organizations that are out there. Anyone can find almost any information that they need just by tapping into these orgs, especially AFTD, just by tapping into it. I mean, you have a slew of information. It's not like it was when we started. There wasn't that much. We didn't know how to get to that information. Let me say that. But now I must say that the information is there for caregivers, for people who have the diagnosis. Everything is right there. So you're not really lost. You just have to seek them and find that information.
But I want to give grace to those who do not have that ability, who may not even have access to Wi-Fi, who are in become who are in trepidation just being in the presence of researchers, scientists, and doctors. I get it. I really get it. I understand. And I have a high degree of empathy. But if you're listening out there, I just want to share with you that Chris is right in that support avails you. It's there for you. You're going to have to take a step. Someone is going to meet you on that step, but it's important that you take it. And I know you might be thinking, geez, I don't know what to do. We're going to give you some resources at the end of this interview, and just take the step. I am telling you, you will be met. You will be met. And we're going to meet you where you are. And we're going to hopefully take you on this journey to give you the tools that you need to be successful, because you're not alone. It seems like it. I know I felt like I was on an island many of times. I get it. But there is support, and there are people who care. And it's important that you be in the community of people who, like you, have a diagnosis of FTD, because it's misunderstood. And when you try to share it with people, they don't get it. But in the community of those with diagnoses of FTD, we get it, and we want to support you. So please know that.
I know that you've already shared a lot of suggestions for other families. Are there any other, what are your top resources, top suggestions for those who are still on the road to get, that final name and diagnosis?
Yeah. This is something that I speak about pretty much any opportunity that is given to me. You guys know that there's Alzheimer's, there's Lewy body, there's Parkinson's disease, dementia, there's vascular, and certainly there's FTD. It is quintessential that once you get a diagnosis, that you stay on the path of resources, medication, and the like that deals with FTD. So connect with the organization. It doesn't have to be the only organization, but it needs to be your top priority organization as it speaks to those things. That's because this disease and the other four I just enumerated are specialty in that I don't want you, if you have an FTD diagnosis, to be necessarily doing all the things that Alzheimer's Association is speaking to, because the diseases are so different. So it's very important that you be on the ship of the diagnoses of which you have received. And if it's FTD in this case, I need you to be collaborating strongly, working with strongly those in the FTD space, because I would like to say that we know it better than most, because it's designed that way. So I would suggest certainly starting with the association and connecting there. And you'll be amazed. There are support groups, there are resources, there's all kinds of things, all kinds of tools, conferences to help you, webinars such as this to help you connect. Very important to connect. Take your time, step by step, but do connect.
You know, I look at this dementia as a journey now. So I'm gonna speak to those who have been diagnosed with this. We're on this journey together, but our experiences are different, or they can be different. But there's some basic things that you can do just to help yourself. And it's very basic. You have to eat different, change your diet maybe. Take all the medication that you need to take or supposed to take, high blood pressure, cholesterol, or whatever it is. Get plenty of rest. Get as much rest possible as you can. And exercise. That's not a lot to do, considering you're helping your body fight this dementia, without a doubt. And it's worth it. It's worth it. It truly is. Like I said, I'm still living a quality life right now, and I've been diagnosed since 2019. I do have moments, which I understand them. Sometimes I laugh at them, but I understand them. And then an important word in my vocabulary has been to adapt. So I adapt to the situations that come to me. I make changes if necessary, but I adapt.
Thank you both so much for your sharing something that is so deeply personal, but that you realize is so important for others to hear. We thank you for your willingness to be open with us.
Absolutely.
You're welcome.
Right. We would like to thank the Tans again for sharing with us. And now our final story comes from a family who wanted to share their experience anonymously. This story highlights the importance of genetic testing in their situation. Sharing genetic status is a personal decision, and this family experience will be read by our own manager of genetic initiatives, Kim Jenny.
Thank you, Anne. So, my husband and I have been married more than 3 decades. Our marriage had its serious ups and downs, but we worked hard to make our marriage work, and we've built a nice life together. We were very different people, but we shared a lot of the same interests and viewpoints. We loved traveling and seeing new places. We particularly enjoyed road trips and our dogs. We often brought them along on camping trips and outdoor adventures. About 5 years ago, I started noticing changes in my husband's personality and memory. He was always a skilled handyman around the house, and we rarely needed to call in help to make most repairs. If he didn't know how to fix something already, he would quickly learn, buy the materials, and get the job done. One of the first incidents that stands out in my mind was when our sprinkler system broke. And he not only couldn't figure out how to fix it himself, he also resisted calling an irrigation company, saying he'd eventually get the job done. Time went by. It didn't take long for our small patch of lawn to die, and it simply was not worth arguing with him about spending the money to hire somebody, as it upset him so much. Over the next year, he became more agitated, compulsive, and seemed to be struggling with obsessions and paranoia. He was less interested in interacting with family members, even choosing to stay out of the room when we'd had family or friends over for dinner or an extended stay. When he would choose to interact, he was likely to start arguments and create an unpleasant atmosphere for everyone. I thought something was very wrong, but I wasn't sure what it could be. I did consider divorce because life was so difficult being around him. His family, who were also at a loss, thought he might be depressed, narcissistic, or have bipolar disorder. We had many family conversations and did lots of research trying to determine what could be causing him to be so difficult. After a few more months, I noticed his memory deteriorating further. He'd leave his credit card at a restaurant or his wallet at the office. He would miss appointments and forget conversations, even repeating himself several times in the same interaction. My concern grew that this could be some sort of dementia. I was particularly alarmed because his mother had died from an early onset dementia, which started with loss of language My husband's symptoms didn't seem related because she was always so easygoing and kind, and her symptoms were nothing like his. I had come across the disorder frontotemporal dementia while researching, but that didn't seem right because he wasn't behaving inappropriately with strangers, and I'd read that memory isn't usually impacted by FTD. Meanwhile, my husband saw no problems and took no responsibility for his behavior, but he agreed to see our primary care physician because he too was concerned about his memory issues. Our primary care doctor quickly referred us to a neurologist who determined at the first appointment that he had mild cognitive impairment based on a screening that was done in the office. There was no explanation as to why he would be suffering from this, but the doctor suggested an MRI as the next step. The MRI came back within the normal range, and the doctor sent us home with a recommendation to see a therapist to manage anxiety and to try meditation to cope with obsessions, and he'd see us again in 6 months. That seemed so crazy to me at the time, especially given the family history. Even though his mother died from an unknown dementia, we were assured that most dementia is not inherited. Only 2 months later, my husband received a warning letter from his employer. They outlined 6 problems with his job performance. 3 were behavioral: aggression in meetings, inability to see other points of view, and manipulating coworkers. And 3 were related to performance: his ability to complete reports, missing deadlines, and he was requiring excessive amounts of mentoring. I panicked. My husband felt that this was all a conspiracy and claimed that the person he worked for wanted to fire everyone on the team and bring in people from his own network. This seemed preposterous to me, and I frantically called the neurologist's office that day and asked to be seen as an emergency given the situation. Fortunately, the doctor accommodated us, and that week he helped us getting him placed on disability so that we could get to the bottom of what was going on. The neurologist then ordered 3 things: sleep study, neuropsychological testing, and a PET scan, which at the time we understood to be a sophisticated scan that could pick up various types of dementia in the early stages at a cellular level. The sleep study came back confirming sleep apnea, which we'd already assumed. The neuropsychological testing showed many areas of high intelligence and high scores. However, it also showed significant deficits in memory. His scores were less than the 5th percentile in this area. The psychologist said she'd never seen test results like his before. The PET scan came back and was in the normal range, so I was dumbfounded. The doctor told us there was no evidence at this stage that he had a neurodegenerative disease, but he would follow us, and we should see him in 6 months to see if the CPAP machine and therapy were helping. Another month or 2 went by, and I watched my husband continue to decline. He stopped taking care of his hygiene. He was wearing the same clothes day after day and didn't seem to care at all. He asked me the same questions, and he started collecting objects and hoarding. He was never very interested in shopping, but then he became obsessed with deal sites and online shopping. I was very upset at this point and set up follow-up appointments with his primary care and the neurologist. They both told us nothing more that we could do at this point, and he should keep going to therapy and using his CPAP machine. I decided we needed a second opinion, and thankfully, we secured an appointment with a new neurologist just 2 weeks later. This new neurologist listened carefully to everything we'd been through and told us there were 3 more tests he could run: a lumbar puncture, an EEG, and genetic testing. This was the first time a doctor told me a genetic cause was in the realm of possibilities. The EEG came back first. It was normal. On the day my husband was supposed to get his lumbar puncture, we went to the office, and coincidentally, the results of the genetic test were received that morning. The neurologist told us there would be no need for a lumbar puncture because the genetic test identified a progranulin mutation, and this was the cause of his symptoms. The doctor very matter-of-factly explained that my husband had progranulin or GRN, FTD, and the implications. He talked about the disease being terminal and tried to assure us by saying that none of us knows how long we're actually going to live. We should live each day to the fullest and try to make the most of the years we have left. He told us the disease was not curable, but there might be some trials I could look at by going to clinicaltrials.gov. Tears were rolling down my face already when he explained that my husband's brothers and sisters, my nieces and nephews, and our children also have a 50% chance of having the same genetic variant. I couldn't believe everything I just heard. I was completely devastated. My husband sat there quietly listening, but he was emotionless. I know now that it is very common for families to struggle for multiple years trying to get an FTD diagnosis. And I feel somewhat fortunate that even though it felt like a lifetime, my husband was diagnosed exactly 1 year after our first visit to the primary care physician. And I understand that it can take, on average, over 3.5 years to get a diagnosis. I can't even fathom waiting that long, the torture. That same evening, a genetics doctor gave us a call and provided further explanation of the progranulin mutation and told us she would help us to identify a suitable trial. As she explained, there were a few for patients with GRN mutations. By that time, I had already been on clinicaltrials.gov and was struggling to navigate the options and the terminology. We were so fortunate to have the help of this doctor, and within days, she pulled together a list of options available in the US, and there were 2 gene therapy trials, 1 monoclonal antibody trial, and 1 observational study. She even had preliminary conversations with each of the site coordinators to provide us with the most accurate information. We discussed pros and cons for each, and then I was able to set up meetings with site coordinators to talk with each of them myself. We set up a family Zoom call to gain alignment and ultimately decided to move forward with one of them. We were all very committed to trial participation because even if doing so did not slow my husband's progression or save his life, we'd be contributing to the science to end this nightmare for other families. I don't recall exactly when in the journey I discovered AFTD, but I feel like the organization has been by my side since the beginning. I must have found AFTD in one of my Google searches when my husband was diagnosed. I am immensely grateful for the education, connections, and the hope the organization brings. If you're struggling with a diagnostic journey, or even if your loved one is already diagnosed, here's my advice. First, educate yourself about FTD. Dementia isn't just Alzheimer's. Behavior, language, and movement changes can all be signs. And even though memory is not usually one of the presenting symptoms, in some cases, like ours, it can be. 2, push for genetic counseling and testing, especially if there's a family history of early onset dementia or other neurodegenerative diseases. There are clinical trials available now for some genetic forms, with more in the pipeline. These companies need participants in order to complete their trials and achieve results. Next, advocate with urgency. With FTD, time matters. Early intervention offers the best chance for meaningful treatment or management of the symptoms. Keep pushing hard for your loved one. You know when something isn't right. And finally, get involved in research. Even if your loved one does not qualify for an interventional trial, there are observational studies that are available to study and help us understand FTD. Knowledge is power, and the more we learn about the disorder, the faster we will find cures for all forms of FTD. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters for sharing their experiences and insights with us today. And we will now have Esther Kane, AFTD's Director of Support and Education, join myself and Kim on screen for our question and answer section. And I know we've had quite a few questions come in from the audience. So just to start out this time, we do know that so many resources were mentioned through the stories today. So we want to just touch on, where these can be found from us here at AFTD. And if you have questions about any of these resources, you're always welcome to connect with us on the helpline. But I know several talked about the diagnostic checklists, which are such a valuable resource and are available for many of the subtypes of FTD. And these are available on our website. And there is also a newly updated resource, Life After an FTD Diagnosis, that is available on our site as well. So there are several other listed here on the screen, and then we will get started with some questions. And if you still haven't submitted your question, please send it into the Q&A box now. So I know there were several questions on this same challenge that we know is a reality for a lot of families. Talking about how do you navigate an evaluation when the person themselves may not recognize the changes, the symptoms, they have a lack of insight, which then can cause a resistance to going to the doctor. So I think the three of us, we can chat about this. Esther, do you want to start off and share?
Yeah, I think
Your
lack
thoughts
of
on this?
insight is actually one of the biggest barriers that people face in trying to get an accurate diagnosis because very often, if there's not language changes or movement changes happening and the changes are actually behavioral and the person has lack of insight or what we sometimes call anosognosia, it's very hard for the clinicians and the people around to be able to see what you're describing or what's actually happening in the situation. So what we really recommend is that you keep good notes. Get a journal, get a pad of paper, do it on the notes section on your phone, and start to keep notes of the behaviors you're seeing or the things that are making you question what's happening. I think many of the people today, Chris and Debbie, were both talking about, and our story read by Kim, about the need to advocate and the need to really be able to really express what's happening and to keep pushing for the information. And so sometimes the best thing you can do is just bring the story to the clinician, even if the person is acting like everything's fine, but get them on board with what you're seeing and what's happening. And sometimes they can help you try to figure out what the next best step is. Some people too have taken the avenue of saying, okay, I'm going to, um, they'll kind of almost push the person to say, fine, maybe you are fine. Go prove me wrong. Go get the PET scan and prove me wrong. And almost taking a different tactic. But we've had a couple of families who we've talked to that tactic has worked for them. Those are a few of the things that I can think of that I know are really important. Another one we often recommend if you're trying to get a diagnosis and this lack of insight is a symptom is you can actually give the information to the doctor even before an appointment. So if you're going with the loved one and you saying these symptoms are happening, let's say you can get them there. Maybe you can get them to the appointment, but when you start talking about it, they get very frustrated or agitated. You can give all that information to the doctor ahead of time. You can call the office and say, I want to submit some information for our appointment ahead of time for the doctor. Can I have a conversation with the doctor before the appointment? And very often that can kind of help the doctor shape the questions and the information that he's sharing. And bring the checklist with you. Show them what it is that you're seeing specifically so they can make a connection to what might possibly be something they want to pursue in the differential diagnosis.
Yeah. And we're glad, for those of you who are having that experience, we're glad that you're here with us today and that you're already getting the information and connecting with support. If you're feeling that your experiences are matching what you're reading about FTD, we hope that it can keep you informed and connected on, what can be such an isolating journey. And these can be really individualized situations. So you can always give us a call on the helpline to talk through as well. Now, I know we've had a few other questions that'll kind of combine into this as well. For Kim, when a family is noticing changes in their loved one and they are aware that there may be some family history, what suggestions do you have when they're first starting to pursue an evaluation?
That's a really good question. I would say, as Sharon's story sort of demonstrated, sometimes there's a family history and a family brings it up, but it's kind of pushed aside because, as Sharon heard, Not all dementia is inherited. In fact, most dementia is not inherited. I would push the family history. I would continue to point out that there is a family history. I think another important thing that a lot of physicians aren't as aware of is the number of clinical trials that are available and the importance of research and how it's focused on genetic forms of FTD. And research focuses on genetic causes of FTD because when we understand the underlying cause, why FTD developed in this person, then we can target that for treatment. So most of the clinical trials are focused on genetic FTD. And if families express an interest in participating in research, the physicians are more likely to consider a genetic cause and a genetic evaluation.
Thank you, Kim. That's really helpful. Yeah. And then I think we've had, some other questions, and we know this can be part of the journey. We heard in some of the stories how finding a doctor with a specialty in FTD was often key for so many families. And so there are many who might have gotten different opinions or different diagnoses. And so how do you know who to trust, or how do you find the right health professionals? Esther, I don't know if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think I would start with saying, we're in a time right now in FTD diagnosis where the diagnosis is really made by imaging of the brain to see what's happening in the brain, along with an overview of the clinical symptoms, usually a neuropsychological assessment, and hopefully, usually, or sometimes genetic testing to help confirm what's happening. But because it's a kind of a combination of different things that have to occur, there's not a clear biomarker right now that just says, yes, this is FTD. So when we talk about FTD diagnosis, we have, probable FTD diagnosis where there's multiple symptoms and neuroimaging showing us that this person looks like they have a probable diagnosis. And then the only way really to get a definitive diagnosis right now is either through autopsy or through genetic testing. Because of that, sometimes clinicians can be a little cautious because they want to be fair with you in giving you the diagnosis. And so we've talked to some families and heard from them who've kind of said that, the doctor won't just say, yes, it's definitely FTD. And that's because they can't say, yes, definitely it's FTD at this time because of the current state. So finding a clinician who understands the symptoms well is really important. Not every neurologist is well versed. You're going to do better with a cognitive or behavioral neurologist who kind of focuses more on those aspects of the brain, focusing more on memory and what's happening in those spaces, unless you're presenting with movement symptoms, in which case you're going to do better with a movement specialist or a doctor, neurologist specializing in that area. AFTD does list on our website medical diagnostic centers from around the country who we've talked to, who we have good relationship with, and who we're fairly comfortable with that can give a good FTD diagnosis. It's not uncommon for people to have to go for a second opinion or who need to kind of dig in deeper during the diagnostic process.
I also
Thank
want to
you.
just sort of highlight that in Sharon's story, genetic testing really expedited the diagnosis. All of the typical tests that were done were coming back normal. And those genetic test results not only got to the diagnosis faster, but also avoided her husband having to have a lumbar puncture, which for anyone who's had a lumbar puncture, that's not a pleasant procedure to go through. So you can save time, you can save resources, and you can spare the person some invasive procedures. So push for genetics as well.
I would say and learn before you even push for genetics. Like Kim usually would say this, so I'm just going to say it
Yes.
for her. But just take the time to learn. AFTD's website and information about genetics is pretty comprehensive. We have resources. You can call the helpline with your questions. You really want to understand what that means to pursue genetic testing, and we really recommend that you pursue genetic counseling before you pursue genetic testing. But genetic counseling can really open up a lot of windows, especially if you suspect that this might be happening more in your family or you have other questions or concerns.
Yeah. And genetic counseling does not mean you're having genetic testing. It simply informs you as to whether or not it's something that you might be interested in pursuing.
Great. Thank you both. And so I know there are still a lot of questions here. We tried to cover a lot of topics, but please don't hesitate to reach out to us here on the helpline with other questions, and access, the wealth of resources that are on our website. We thank you all for joining us today, and this concludes our webinar. Take care.